everybody, and welcome back to A Court of Words and Pages. My name is Natalie. So for today's video, I wanted to reflect on my reading year in 2020, look at some of the things that went well and some of the things that didn't go great, talk about how many books I've read, some of my favorites, and then I also want to look into 2021 and set some goals for my reading then. So to start off with 2020. So obviously with all of the lockdowns and COVID restrictions in 2020, I read more books than I've ever read before. According to Goodreads, I read 286 books last year, and I know that is not an accurate number because there were a few times where I just stopped using Goodreads because I didn't feel like it. So that number is probably maybe closer to 300, which is concerning, and it also says I read 110,404 pages with an average star rating of 3.7 stars. The stars I am conflicted about because 3.7 isn't a bad star rating, but for someone who basically only reads for pleasure, I'd hope that that number would have been a bit higher, and I think that's something I'm going to try to do in 2020 is make sure my star rating is higher, maybe try to get it to 4 stars. Now, my main problem with my reading in 2020 is I focus more on quantity of books than quality of them. I read just for the sake of reading. Even if I didn't want to read a book, or if maybe the book I was reading was really bad and I wasn't enjoying it, I would still read it. I just focused on getting through as many books as I could instead of focusing on reading books I really wanted to and taking my time with that. And that's something I really want to try to prioritize in 2021 is if I'm reading a book and I'm not liking it, put it down. You don't need to read it. If I'm reading a book I really like, then try to take my time with it and really just soak in everything. So just to talk about some of my favorite books of the year, because I'm unfortunately not going to be able to put up a video about that this year, my favorite book of the year was actually Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So this was kind of a surprise to me as to how much I really enjoyed it, because kind of at the beginning of COVID and all of that, I read the original Gracia trilogy and I didn't love it. It just felt very typical YA fantasy, very heavy on the tropes, and it wasn't my favorite. I hated the love triangle. I found the plot just to be very boring and predictable, honestly. So going into Six of Crows, I was hoping it would be better, but I wasn't expecting anything, but I loved it so much. I devoured it so quickly. I think I read it in about April or May, and then a few months later I read Crooked Kingdom, and I loved that one probably just as much. These books are just amazing. Six of Crows is basically about a gang of thieves led by Kaz Becker who are going on a mission to rescue this man to stop the spread of this very dangerous drug that basically enhances the magic in the world. And oh my god, this book was just so phenomenal. To start off, the setting was so well developed. So the book is for the most part set in Ketterdam, which is this fictional world that's basically, I think it's inspired by Amsterdam, and it was so well developed. The book focuses a lot on the criminal underworld of the city where all the gangs rule, and you really get that. The setting is really developed just to be this kind of grimy, greasy, dark underworld where a lot of nothing good happens, and it was just so well developed. Of reading it, you could just imagine that this city was a real place. Another thing was the characters were so well developed. Throughout the story, we focus on the 6 main characters who are the 6 parts of the crew that are going on this mission. And just throughout the story, you really learn each of them, what they want, their motivations. And usually for me, in heist stories, I sometimes have a bit of a trouble, remembering exactly which character is which and what each character wants. I didn't have that problem in Six of Crows. I could remember exactly who each character was, and I could remember exactly all the reasons why I loved them and why they were just so precious and some of the best characters. So my second favorite book of the year, it's not a book, it's a series. That's the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. I fell in love with this series. I fell in love actually with a lot of Sarah J. Maas's stuff this year. I really fell in love with Throne of Glass and the Crescent City book that came out, but I think Throne of Glass just took the tier for me because we had so much in this world. I actually started off reading Throne of Glass in January of last year by reading The Assassin's Blade, and then I didn't read any of it for a few months, and then some point in March when we're in lockdown, I decided, hey, let's pick up Throne of Glass. I struggled a bit to get through the first 2 books, but like as soon as I got into Air of Fire, I just blew through the rest of the series, which is honestly kind of funny because Air of Fire on, those books are big. So basically in the original Throne of Glass book, we follow Selena Sardouthian, who is an assassin who has just been released from prison. She's been working in the salt mines as a slave for the last year, and she's been released so she can compete in a competition to become the king's assassin. And then the first book follows that competition. The rest of the series is just kind of all the things that follow after that. And for me, it's really not just the first 2 books, but the way the world expands after Crown of Midnight, which is the second book in the series. Something happens at the very end of Crown of Midnight that just kind of changes the world and expands. So the next part of the series, we just learn so much more about the world, because the Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight are really centered in this one part of the world. And then in the other books, we get to explore these other parts and just learn so much more, including we get so many more characters. Not that the ones in the original books aren't great, because they're amazing characters. But we get these new characters, and then the way Sarah J. Maas makes you fall in love with the new characters while still developing all the old characters to also become characters that you can really like is phenomenal. Another part of this series I love is the magic aspect. You really don't get a lot of magic until after Crown of Midnight, but once it does, it is amazing. This world is filled with these different magical creatures, and they are amazing. Throne of Glass is very much based on kind of the elemental magic system, which while it is a classic one, it's probably my favorite magic system to learn about. I think it's just because it's very simple. You know, you have the 4 elements, and then sometimes there's just like additions onto stuff, and it is phenomenal. I would recommend Throne of Glass. I know it's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but I think it is a good book. So just to mention some other books that I really loved last year, I'm not going to go too much in depth with them. So Felix Ever After was another one that I really enjoyed. I read it in one day. I think it's such a phenomenally important story to read. Red, White, and Royal Blue was just this adorable romance book that I fell in love. The 2 main characters, Alex and Henry, have my heart. The Song of Achilles was a beautiful, heartbreaking novel that's a retelling of some Greek mythology. The Raven Boys is a magical, whimsical book that's really character focused as we focus on learning about our 5 main characters and their adventures. So those were some of my favorite books of 2020. So just to briefly mention some of my least favorite books, I'm not going to talk about them too much because I don't want to harp on the negative, but let's just talk about a few. So first off, we had First Love by James Patterson and Emily Raymond. This book was just so unrealistic. It was terrible. It also felt like The Fault in Our Stars. It was like a complete rip-off of that, which I don't like The Fault in Our Stars that much. And so if this book was like a rip-off of it, I didn't like it. I thought the writing was terrible. The characters were just annoying. And like I said, it's unbelievable. Like, these 2 characters walk into an emergency room at the hospital, and they're both underage, and like, no one thinks to ask, oh, where are your parents? They just don't talk about that. Hush Hush by Becca Fitzpatrick. That was not a good time. I remember nothing from it. I thought the writing was terrible, and the characters got on my nerves so much. I think I listened to it on audiobook, and then like less than a week later, I went to pick up the sequel, started listening to it, and I went, I don't know who these people are. It didn't stick with me. I remembered nothing. And finally, The 6 Rules of Maybe by Deb Calenti. I don't know how to say her last name. It's not that this book was necessarily bad. I just felt uncomfortable reading it because we're basically following this girl who just has this giant crush on her sister's husband, and her sister is pregnant with her husband, and it just makes me uncomfortable. And the main character just felt really immature and annoying. Like, just don't. Even if you have like a crush on your sister's husband, don't like try to pursue that. It was bad, and I didn't like it. So 2020, maybe not the best reading year. I had some gems, I definitely did, but I also had a lot of books that were not gems, and I don't want to think about them anymore, and I want to focus on 2021, where we're going to read a lot better books. So I don't have like a reading goal in 2021. I set it to 75 on Goodreads just as a completely arbitrary number. I could have probably put it at 100, saying as I read almost 300 books last year, but I don't know what's gonna happen in 2021. We don't know where the state of the world is heading, and it's not looking amazing right now. So I just decided 75 was just a nice number to put it at, knowing that I was probably gonna get to 75 books way early in the year. It's actually kind of ironic that I put it at 75 books thinking, oh, I'll probably read way more, when I haven't read that many books in January. Hopefully I can keep on track with my 75 books and hopefully read more, but we'll see. Some other goals, as I briefly touched on before, I want to work on really taking my time with books and enjoying them instead of rushing through them so I can get to the next book. I want to just focus on enjoying what I'm reading, and if I'm not enjoying what I'm reading, then just don't read it and put it down. And then just a major one that you would think I wouldn't have to say is don't pick up books that I don't want to read or don't sound interesting or don't think I'm gonna like, because I did that in 2020. And I don't know why. Another one that's not necessarily reading, but like books, is I do want to work on growing my book collection in 2020, but not necessarily of books that I haven't read, but of some of my favorite books. Because I use my library a lot, I don't always have copies of some of my favorite books, and I want to, so that if I ever want to like reread it or like maybe even read it and like annotate some of my favorite parts, I do have the ability to do that. Another thing is I want to focus on dedicating time to reading. So I read a lot, but I'm really bad at like sitting down and reading for long periods of time. I'm always like looking at my phone or watching TV while reading. I want to focus on just like sitting down and reading. Specifically, a goal of mine is to read for 20 to 30 minutes before bed every night, because I think that'll just be like a nice calming way to end my evenings, and it will force me to read. But have I been doing that in January? No, but we're going to get better about it. Another one that's kind of more booktube related is first to post consistently on this channel, because it's been like a month since I last posted, and I want to get consistent with uploading every week. And then I want to try to participate in some read-alongs or readathons. I need to look into exactly what my plans are, but I feel like that's a good way to like interact with people in the community. And then my final goal for the year is I have some specific genres that I want to read more of. My first one is I want to read a classic every month. This is a goal that I had in 2020 and I failed epically at it. But I am going into 2021 and I am still going to try to put this goal on my list. I think the thing about classics is they're always so intimidating. A lot of them are really long and I don't know where to look for classics. So in 2021, I'm going to focus on not reading classics that are necessarily like huge and very chunky, but just reading things that sound like something like, if this wasn't a classic, would I pick it up? And if the answer is yes, then I'm going to try to read it. And to hold myself accountable for this, my goal is to, after I finish my book, I want to film a review for it and put it out on BookTube. I'm not necessarily looking for a long review. I mean, something maybe 10 minutes, possibly even under if I don't have that many thoughts, just so that I'm holding myself accountable and making sure I'm reading these books. Another genre goal is I want to try to read some adult high fantasy. Now, I read a lot of young adult fantasy, and trust me, I think young adult fantasy is totally a valid genre, and if that's what you like, then you should read all the young adult fantasy. However, I've been really interested in trying out adult fantasy, and I have in early 2021, and I really enjoy it. So I've set two goals particularly for adult fantasy, and that's first off, to read some Brandon Sanderson. That's where I've started so far, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm currently in the middle of my second Sanderson book, and I'm loving it. I can't wait to read more of this, particularly in the Cosmere, because that's where a lot of connected books live. And then I want to try reading Lord of the Rings, because it's this classic fantasy series that a lot of people who really love fantasy have read, and I'm interested in. I haven't seen the movies. I haven't read the books. I need to start somewhere, so let's start with the books. Oh, and just to quickly mention, with kind of Sanderson and then other high fantasy series, my best friend and I are going to buddy read high fantasy stuff. So currently we're buddy reading the Cosmere together, which is fun. Another genre I want to read is dark academia. I've never read anything in this genre before. That's actually maybe a lie. I've read one book, but I'm not quite sure if it's qualified as that, so I don't know. But it just seems like a genre that I love. I love like libraries in like Europe that are like huge. I watch these like music compilations on YouTube that are like aesthetics, and some of my favorite ones are like the you're studying in a haunted library or like dark academia themed ones, and I just want to give it a shot. I don't have a full list of dark academia books that I want to read. Like the two that come to the top of my head are The Secret History by Donna Tartt and Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. But obviously if I read those two and I like them, then I'll have to like look into more books that are considered dark academia and try those. So kind of my final like genre one is to reread some of my childhood favorite books. I don't know why I want to do this, but I just want to. So some of the series that I want to do are I want to reread the Land of Stories series. That was honestly probably one of my favorite series I read growing up. I remember like waiting for the next book to come out and like pre-ordering it from Barnes & Noble, and then like on the release date just being so excited to get it in the mail so I could read it. I want to try rereading Keepers of the Lost City because I think, if I remember correctly, I enjoyed that series, but I got burnt out from reading it because like one time, like come time for the new release, I tried to like reread all of the books like in the week before, which was just a bit too much because they're like big books, and I think some of them were a bit repetitive and I just didn't want to do it. But I want to maybe like reading one a month or something like that, so I'm not like bothering myself too much with it. And then I think I want to reread the School for Good and Evil series because that was another favorite series I liked growing up, and the final book in the like second trilogy just came out last year and I haven't read it yet, and I think it'd be fun to like reread the whole series. So yeah, and then my final reading goal for 2021 is to read books that I get in fairy loot boxes, because I'm going to have a subscription for at least 6 months more, and if I like it then probably continuing on. And I don't just want to be collecting these books and never reading them. I want to make sure I'm reading them. So that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and if you want to see what I do next with my channel, make sure to subscribe down below, and I'll see you hopefully next week. Bye!